I started to feel really old yesterday at lunchtime. We sat down and we're having a conversation about how the children being born right now will never know a world without artificial intelligence. And then we started talking about how I remember a world where we had telephones, one telephone that was corded in the house. And I remember when call waiting started. And then we talked about all the iterations of phones and computers and being born before people had computers in the home.
I grew up with a party line.
That's what I was going to say. Wendy, do you remember the party lines?
When I wanted to talk to my friends, I would click the lever a few times so whoever was talking on the other end would know somebody's either listening in or wants to use the phone. That was my secret message.
Did you know what your ring was on the party line?
One long, one short.
We had party line out at the lake. I never knew what the ring was.
You just answer every phone call.
Well, the phone would ring and I get excited, and then my parents would be like, "That's not our ring," and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Because of course in the city it was just a regular line, and I just gave up on it eventually. The phone would ring, I never answered it because I didn't understand. It's too complicated a concept for me, I guess.
Hey, well, let's dive into the podcast, shall we?
Well, that links to change, actually, right? Like you think about the pace of change that we have undergone. I often don't think about that. It's like I think about my grandparents when they talk about horse and buggy and canning and, their cellar with the dirt floor.
Interesting.
But we've also undergone a lot of change.
We have. The change in the last 50 years or so has been monumental.
Yes.
So let's dive in. Let's talk about change, shall we?
Yeah.
Welcome to the Achieve Workplace Culture podcast, where Wendy, Chris, and Eric explore the latest news stories, their work, and trends for creating and maintaining a healthy workplace culture.
Welcome to episode 39 of the Achieve Workplace Culture podcast, where we try to make the case that if you're not paying attention to workplace culture, if you're not training your leaders to think about workplace culture, you're going to be missing out on all kinds of opportunities. I'm Eric Stutzman, and I'm here with my good friends, the ever curious, kind, and fun to talk to, Wendy and Chris. So just let's do a quick check-in, shall we? How are you doing this morning?
Very good. Well, thank you for that. Mostly curious and kind. Aspire to be. I'm doing really well. I feel like I'm grounded now that I'm here. My husband left yesterday to Costa Rica with my cousin. They're doing a little bit of motorbiking around the country, off-road, seeing the sights. And I got a message this morning. He's landed. He showed me a picture of his breakfast. He's doing well. He, of course, is up before everyone else. So no, I'm feeling really grounded. He's safe and sound. I'm here. I know he's going to have a great week, and now I can shift my focus to work and what's next.
Oh, isn't that cool? Costa Rica. And here we are in the snow in Manitoba.
A mild day, though.
Mild, yeah.
33, -3, I think is what temperature is today.
Yeah, for American listeners, that's just a little bit below freezing.
Right. Whereas it was like -30 just the other day. So that's pretty good. Well, that's great. I'm happy for Pete. That sounds lovely. I'm curious is a good word. You described your co-host here. I went this morning, I had an appointment at a sleep clinic. So I'm doing a sleep study tonight. I'm curious to see what this ring that I will be wearing on my finger tonight tells me.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Sleep study. So I'm curious.
Is that to help improve your sleep?
Just something the doctor said, I should probably try. And I went in for an annual checkup, and if there's I'm turning 50 this year, so they're checking me out for all sorts of stuff. Nothing particular, nothing's wrong, but just preventive, which I suppose is a good thing. But I am curious to see what the sleep study tells me. So
it's a good thing. Yeah. Well, today for this episode, we're going to be talking about change, and in particular, a term called socializing change. We want to unpack what socializing change is. And, as we've just been talking about, we in our lives have experienced tremendous changes. There's technological changes, there's societal changes, there's, wars have come and gone, recessions have come and gone, pandemics have come and gone. There's change all around us all the time, and that happens in our organizations too. And our workplace cultures are always impacted by change. In fact, I was thinking prior to the show about how I believe that a healthy workplace culture, you actually don't arrive at that. I mean, in some ways you do. You can look around and say, yeah, it feels pretty healthy right now, but if it's healthy, it's changing. And so there isn't like a magical, now we got it, now we can just hold that there and keep it, and now it's going to be healthy forever.
Sure.
It's like if you're not also changing within that, you're gonna suffer. You're gonna end at some point.
You never arrive.
Right?
You don't.
Right. Just like leaders don't really arrive.
Right.
Cultures don't really arrive.
Yeah.
Right? So this topic of socializing change is one that we use that term around here. What socializing change? I'm wondering if either of you want to unpack what the term socializing change means as we think about it here at Achieve.
Chris, you want to wrestle for it?
You go. You go.
Well, I know what typically people think about socializing change is just communicating about change and communicating often about it. And that's important, but I think there's a whole structure to change or a whole framework that we should be thinking about when we're considering change. And I think when it links to workplace culture, it has to do with setting the stage, creating the environment, the context in which change can be received. Not just communicating about here's the change that's coming down, but if change is a part of growth and development and responsiveness, which we believe it really is, then that's going to be a constant within organizations that are moving forward, that are hopefully are going to be successful. So we have to set the conditions first, that people can receive change. I think that it's normalized in some way. And then we communicate about what the change is. Then we also implement the change, and we begin that process of what that actual change is. And then we need to, in some way, make sure that we're following up. It's not just like it's a one and done, that we sustain what that change is.
Yeah, that's well laid out. I think the idea of socializing change, I think it comes up often at a point where it's like, has this change been socialized? When something within an organization is happening, and all of a sudden someone asks the question, have we socialized? And really what that means is, have we talked to people about this?
Yeah.
This idea even. And unfortunately, more often than not always, but what we see is that have we socialized the change? And I think the idea, and what you're saying, Wendy, is have we even talked about this idea, this direction that we're going, so that we can have some people have some input into this? And we've caught ourselves many times, as within our own management team, we realize we should really be talking to staff about this. But if you don't socialize it at the right time, then you're not really socializing it. You're just telling people about it. That's a little different than socializing.
Putting something in a newsletter is not the same as socializing change.
Right. Yeah.
At least I think we're talking much more about bringing people along for the ride, maybe including them. Chris, we were chatting yesterday, and you were talking about an experience you had as a supervisor quite a number of years ago in a large corporation. Wow, something to do with somebody's salary. And I feel like that's a really great example to talk about what socializing change could have been and wasn't, and maybe you could share that.
Share my failures as an example of. That's an interesting one. Right? So I think you're right. We'll use this idea of, let's hold on to this idea of socializing change.
Yeah.
So earlier on in my career, I spent a number of years managing a group of supervisors who then had a team of 20 some odd individuals ultimately, but that was managed through 3 supervisors, very competent supervisors, I might add. I was in a position that was way over my head when I reflect back to what I was doing then. But at the time, there was a decision that had been made to change the compensation structure of the supervisory level. And the idea was to move our supervisors from being hourly paid to salaried. And our HR department said, well, your supervisors work a lot of overtime. We need to factor that into their salary. So there was a substantial bump in the salary that was being offered from what they were being paid hourly. And I thought it was very generous. And I was like, oh, they're going to love this. But we did all of the legwork on the change in this situation.
The research.
And then I remember, now I was going to tell the supervisors about this amazing change in compensation and how it was going to benefit them. And I did, and I was all happy to say, and your new salary is this. Now, this was at the time, this was a $23,000 or $24,000 bump in their base pay, which was really significant given where they were at. And I remember one of the supervisors in particular was kind of taken aback, was uncertain, had a lot of questions. And I was like, what's their problem? This is a gift. And I was admittedly a little bit frustrated. Like, this is an obvious no-brainer. This is a win. And, they said a lot of questions. And then we eventually, talked through them, and they went along with the change. That was fine. And a couple of years later, there was a change in legislation where you didn't really qualify as management. If you weren't management, you couldn't be paid salary, you had to be paid hourly, because a lot of organizations were taking advantage of overtime. So we had to, or unpaid overtime, so we actually had to switch our supervisors back to hourly. And the decision was made, though, to leave their hourly rate at what their salaries had been bumped up to already. So they were now going to make this increased wage plus overtime.
Ooh, nice.
Super win.
Yeah.
And I was, again, same thing. We did all of the legwork, and I sat down, same supervisor, and gifted them with this amazing new compensation structure. Same thing. Uncertainty, questions, and doubt. And again, I was like, what's their problem? And when I think about it, I completely missed the mark as their leader, 100%. So this idea of socializing change, let's go back to it. I didn't socialize the change with any of them. I told them about the change.
Right.
I gave them no time to even think about it, to think about questions they might have. If I was really effective as a leader, and I have a lot of examples from that time in my career when I was not effective, I would have talked about what was coming.
What we're thinking about. Hey, we're thinking about this.
Right.
We're wanting to be, the first time, we're wanting to make sure you're generously compensated, and we're considering, do you have any questions about that? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah.
And I'll take it back to HR for our discussions, right?
Yeah. And it's what should have been done, and maybe this is a nuance that we want to talk about, is socialize the idea behind the change, as opposed to socializing the change. I think a lot of people did what Chris did. When we say we're socializing the change, we're telling them about it. Let's socialize the idea so we could understand some potential concerns, so that when we do make the change, it's informed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and ideally, when it can be that whatever the change initiative is, that it is a social activity, that there's collaboration, that people feel like they have a voice, that they can input into what that change is, or that they understand what their part is or potentially could be, and then can answer questions or ask questions, respond to, here's the idea. And ideally, part of that socialization is the why we're even thinking about whatever it is, a change in salary, a new policy, a new procedure, a new system. People don't want to be told. People want to be a part so that they have a buy-in, because we so often hear about resistance to change. Well, why do people resist change? Well, one of the reasons we know is when they feel like they're being told to do something. Nobody likes to be told.
Yeah.
Children don't like to be told, but especially adults. We
Well,
don't
humans,
like to
just
be told.
humans generally don't.
Yeah, we
See,
don't.
Wendy, as you're saying that, just digging back in that story, I missed on so many marks, just fundamentally on it. Any change, that actually is an understandable response from those supervisors.
Absolutely.
Not to mention, I was changing, or we as an organization were changing how they're paid, how they put food on the table for their families. So when I'm kind of laughing at myself now at how naive I was to not even pick up on that. Like, we're going to change really their lifeblood here to a certain extent, and I haven't even factored in that they might need to know a little bit more and have some questions. And my response was, what's their problem?
What's their problem?
Well, thank you. You called it a failure. Let's reframe it as a learning. And thank you for sharing that with us, because that's a great example to discuss and unpack and give so many illustrations around how do we socialize change. And I think, we try to safeguard against, but we have fallen prey to the same thing. We have something that we see as needing to be addressed within our organization. We think about it, we ponder it, we want to be really intentional about supporting other teams within our organization or a structure or a process. And then we have this already formed idea that we put forward, as opposed to, as leaders, being vulnerable and saying, we're really wrestling with this.
Yeah.
And can you help us? Mm-hmm. This is the problem we want to address, or this is something we think we need to be thinking about and bringing people in earlier on. And I think it's a little bit, not all change is created equally either. There are some changes that happen within an organization that have much more impact on people than others. Like if you
Yes.
think about removing someone, I'm thinking about an organization where they needed to remove a CEO, and that conversation had to be held in confidentiality. But more often than not, change initiatives that impact people on an ongoing basis, they can be socialized in some way.
I'm always amazed at how, we can sit down as an executive team and come up with some great idea about how we want to, maybe change the way a department works a little bit or introduce a policy, and I'm feeling really confident with it. And then I go to a few other people in the organization and say, hey, we're thinking about this. And all of a sudden, I realize that we missed 28 different important things to think about, and that there's and that inclusion of more voices not only helps an idea get better, but also creates buy-in when things actually change later on.
Yes.
But it's that process of, we're considering this, we'd like to hear what you think. And it's easy to miss that when you think you're brilliant. So, let's all be humble a little bit, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, Eric, is to that humility is key. And reflecting back on my learnings of the past, Wendy, truthfully was a lack of humility at that point in time in my career. And I missed a lot of opportunities to do it. And I think, so one of the things we're really talking about here is when we're saying socialize the change, we're really saying socialize the idea of a change.
Yeah.
That's to me, it's nuanced,
like
but
that.
It's pretty important because that's what we're talking about. Because if you're socializing the change, it's kind of too late, I think, in most cases. But I appreciate there are times that you can't. I want to come back to that one a little bit later, but for sure.
Well, and I also think that when we talk, a lot of leaders think about change as systems.
Right.
And it often is, but no matter what the change is, there's always that people side of change that needs to be considered.
Systems serve people.
Yes,
Ultimately,
not the other
and
way
people
around.
operate systems, benefit from systems, or suffer from systems, whatever it is. And so, let's not disconnect, we're going to change this, IT infrastructure without consultation, because when you make that IT change, you might think it's technology, but the technology is for people. And so if we're not consulting stakeholders or bringing them into the conversation, and one of the things that popped into my head is that it's sometimes people don't know that there's a problem. You might see it at an executive level or a leadership level or whatever level you're at, and you see that there's this thing that could be better. The first thing that you have to do is say, we're thinking that maybe we could get more out of X if we did something about it. And we're curious what your experience is and if you have thoughts about that. Or we're thinking about introducing this because this is the problem we're trying to solve. And the reality is one of the things we talk about in our book, The Culture Question, is the idea of collective intelligence. We also mention it in the Don't Blame the Lettuce book. The more brains that you can involve, the better the end product is. Now, yes. So we're trying to figure that out. We have to always balance efficiency with consultation, because you can consult till the end of the world too. But the point here is that when you involve people, you let them know the problem you're trying to solve, and you ask for some input. It helps people dig into it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And when you talk about collective change, or collective intelligence, we also want to safeguard against groupthink.
Yeah.
And I think leaders sometimes come with, here's the problem, here's what I see as the solution, what do you think? As opposed to, here's the problem, what do you think?
What do you think?
So that people don't congregate around a particular idea, but they feel the freedom to share creative ideas and different ways of addressing whatever that issue is.
I like that. Wendy, just this morning, we were talking about a leadership group that meets here and does some book study, and you were reflecting on the impact of having a very senior leader, like an owner in there. And if an owner's in that book club with, say, frontline leaders, and the owner says, or I think this, there's an orientation toward that because of the impact of power. And so if we're wanting to truly socialize change, rather than putting forth our propose initiative first. Instead, we say, here's the problem we think we've identified, or the opportunity we think we've identified. What do you think?
Yeah.
Before you say what you think, because otherwise they're just going to be going, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. Maybe tweak it a little bit this way.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't help but think about, I read a book a number of years ago by an author named Geoff Colvin. It's called Humans Are Underrated. It's something worth putting in the show notes. I mean, it's a bit dated now, but it is still relevant. So we're talking about change, and we're often talking about change from a tech perspective. And the whole concept around humans are underrated is that we just start before we're recording. We're just talking about change in phones and the change that we've seen in the last 50 years. This is the case that Geoff Colvin's making here, is that just with the digitization, computerization, our rate of change has increased in the last 30 or 40 years faster than what we've experienced over the last 300 or something like. I'm making those numbers up, but it's what we've seen. And what he highlights is that's nothing for us to resist as human beings, to fight. What we should do is leverage what we as humans bring to the table. And I think this is what you're talking about. He identifies 3 unique human characteristics that really benefit us at work. And one of those is we as humans have an ability to creatively problem solve together. And what he makes the case for is that when you bring people together that are connected, it's not necessarily, if you bring a group of really smart people together, that might not get the best answer. But if you bring a group of people together that really know each other and realize, hey, Wendy, we haven't heard from you in a while. What are you thinking? We actually have an ability to pull things out from each other that we wouldn't otherwise do. So to your point, if we socialize an idea, a problem, an opportunity in a group, in a healthy workplace culture or a healthy culture on a team, we have an ability to do something nothing else can. That's creatively problem solve together. And that's where you come up with, I think he uses the example of the Apollo 13 mission where they had to, figure out how to get this thing home. That was a group of people creatively problem solving together. And that's what I think we're talking about, because one of the things we talked about as we prepped for this was, maybe I'll throw this question out to you both, is do we fear change as humans? Because that's a comment that you see that all over the place.
Yeah.
Well, what can we do? People just hate change. They fear change. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think we hear that all the time, and especially when organizations are thinking about a change initiative. But I think if we're not changing, we're stagnant, we're not growing. So I think change is actually a good thing. We need to reframe it, but we need to think about what that process is and what the impact on people is. Not all change. The example of, getting married, having a child, starting a new job. These are all changes that we look forward to. We're excited about them. But there are some changes, like if I'm in a bad relationship, I might be looking forward to a change in like a divorce. My children might not feel the same way about that. So I think there's different impact that happens. And we have to think about change as part of growth. Some change is a whole lot easier than other change. And we need to think about, how do we bring people into the process, keep them informed as best as we can, and how are individuals impacted by the change?
Change. I think change is one of those things that we always need to just keep as a value neutral thing. The idea of change, change is essentially a constant.
Yes.
Right? But how we go about socializing the idea of change, bringing people in, matters. And it helps us make change positive or negative. So change is going to happen. It's just there. It's, it's a thing.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Do we need to, we're good? Sorry, there was a siren in the background. You were saying, you were dropping some real deep wisdom there.
Okay,
No, you were. I want to make sure. I was just looking over at Scott just to make sure that we got that. Because I love that value neutral. It is a constant. It's 100% there. It's always going to be there. And to your point, I would actually think we've proven as, again, humans, we're hardwired for it. Yeah. We're constantly changing.
Yeah.
So the notion that we fear change, I don't know that we fear change itself, but
We fear not having enough information.
Yeah.
We fear a negative impact because
Yeah.
whatever. We fear the consequences of change that hasn't been thought out well.
Right. Yeah.
Or, sometimes there's a change that's out of our control on a society level.
Yes.
So some changes, the impact of it isn't always fabulous.
Right.
Yes.
But it's going to
right.
happen. And so how it happens and how we do it matters. I was also thinking about, again, yesterday we were talking, and Chris, you and Wendy have worked with an organization sometime in the last few years. I don't know exactly when it was, but you were talking about a big tech change and impact on staff. And I wonder, I feel like we need to bring this home in terms of, for our listeners, to think about, okay, you're in an organization, let's say you're in a large organization now,
Yeah.
and somebody thinks it's a great idea to make this big, massive change. Could you talk a little bit about that example?
Yeah. No, what I'm going to share here, unfortunately, isn't uncommon.
Right.
So I'm thinking of a few clients right now in my head, but there was a significant. This wasn't even a change. This was, I'd say, a transformation in how business was being done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Really, and it was super impressive. Like this, like digitization and just this real move into the modern age, I would say. And when we got brought in to start, to look at how can we support the organization through this change. This change had been worked on for a number of years and had been planned out into every detail. And I think just through a couple of questions, the impact on the people that would actually be working within it, and even on the back end, experience it hadn't even been considered.
Oof.
And not that there wasn't great work that went into it,
Sure.
but it was, the whole focus was on what the change was and not the impact on those people that are going to be using that.
And how were the people that were going to be using the new system feeling?
Well, they were uncertain. They were fearful because they just didn't know. And I think, as you're saying this, what they needed wasn't too much, actually. It was some information, right, to help assuage some of those concerns. Because as we know, this is one of the things we do know about people is we will create a story.
Yeah, we will.
In the absence of information, we create story. And when we don't really have the information, we're very quick to go to a negative story.
Right.
And that was really what was happening. There was so much misinformation that was going on that they weren't even starting from zero. They were actually starting from a negative spot. They had to actually dig out of to get there. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, well laid out plan.
Yeah.
But hadn't thought about the larger context in which that plan was going to be implemented, and especially the impact on people.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I'm thinking about another client where there was a large change, a digital change, and you mentioned fear, Eric. People were wondering, am I going to be able to keep up? Can I do this? I love my work. I love how it's functioned right now. And that limbo state is where that change transition was happening, but there wasn't any support for that, any comfort, any training. It was like this big vacuum. And they were going, am I going to have to find a new job, either because my job is going to be replaced or because I won't be able to keep up with the new technology.
Right.
And so, again, in the absence of information or speaking into or feeling the comfort to ask questions as the change was being rolled out, people were creating these workarounds to make it look like they were able to function within the new system.
Ooh. Yeah, and of course, workarounds, discussion, gossip about how bad, there's fear, there's all kinds of things that happen when we don't bring people along for the ride. So I think the lesson for me as a leader, for people who are listening, is if you're thinking there's a problem, talk about that with others. Talk about the problem we're trying to solve. Invite some input. Communicate ideas along the way. Ask for more input. Eventually, you might need to make a decision that some people don't love. That's okay, as long as people can live with decisions, even if they don't win by them, if they feel like the process has been fair and inclusive of their voice.
Yeah.
But if their voice hasn't been heard, they might fight it.
Sure.
And so I think that's a really big lesson for all of us as a leader.
Understanding the reason behind the change is a really close second to fully buying in.
Yeah.
I'm not I understand why we're doing it, and it has to be this way. Okay,
Yeah.
that's just as good as as almost as good as saying, I love this change, but at least I understand it. We've all had that happen, right? Sure.
Yeah, and Eric, I was just going to say that process that you outlined is actually the culture that you want to have within your organization so that people trust that change initiatives are not going to be dropped from on high.
That's right.
There's going to be a collaborative process involved. And when they do need to, like in an emergency or when there is confidentiality issues involved, people will trust that that change has been well thought out and they've been informed as much as leadership was able.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a great point, Wendy. I think this is something for us to we've been talking a lot here about change as in this is changing or that's changing. And there's various changes that happen all of the time. And you used the example, Wendy, of a CEO change. And maybe that's something that we can't necessarily socialize. But one of the things that, and this is where what I'm hearing here is, what you can do is prepare your organization to be a change-ready organization, and that is making sure the culture is healthy and that how people are experiencing change. I think this is what we're talking about. People don't necessarily fear change of itself, but all of those things that go into is where the fear comes in, the lack of information, all those sorts of things. And so, yes, for individual changes, we want to make sure we're socializing the idea early on and give people what they need. What we can do beyond that, even ideally before that, is really focus on creating an environment where people feel safe, where they can ask questions, where they can speak up. And that starts to create conditions of high trust. So when there are those changes that come where they can't be socialized for very legitimate reasons, people are understanding, they're like, I'm sure this is for good reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they've had such positive experiences within that workplace. I think you can make it, I think you use that term, a change-ready organization, Eric.
Yeah. And I think maybe if we just remember this, like for me, it's change might be organizational in nature, but it's individual in impact.
Yes.
Each of us is asking, how is this
Yes.
going to affect me? Am I going to be able to handle this? Am I going to know what my job is?
Yep.
Change is organizational in nature, but individual in its impact. We've come to that part of the show where it is time to talk about our rants and raves. We have a couple of them today. I believe we're going to start off with a rave from Wendy over here, and then I've got a rant, and we'll see where that takes us.
Excellent. Yeah. My family and I traveled over the holidays out of province, and we took my mom, who's 79, along with us. On our return trip, she was ahead of us, and I saw her being flagged and pulled aside by security. They pulled her into a corner. They were going through her suitcase, and I knew this would not be a comfortable experience for my mom. And lo and behold, my mom had in her carry-on suitcase a large bottle of shower gel that my children had gifted her. And so when I came through, I walked over, and there is my mom and the security guard in conversation, and I am thinking, of course you cannot take that through, Mom. Look at how big it is. Did you think it was going to be hidden underneath your night coat there? And the security guard was obviously in a position of power and authority, and he was so gentle and kind with my mom. And my mom verbalized to him, she said, it's only shower gel, but it's a gift for my grandchildren who I haven't seen in a long time. And he looked at me and he said, if you're willing, I will take you back out. We'll retrace your steps. I'll take you to the front desk, and you can ask them if they are willing to track down your luggage to put the shower gel in your suitcase so that it can fly home with you. And I readily took him up on the offer. And this is busy. The airport is humming. There are people everywhere running around. And he obviously, again, was in charge. We went back through security 3 times. He mentioned to people, this woman is going back out through security. When she comes back, fast track her to get her back in. And so I went to the counter. I was able to send my mom's shower gel back. So the story ends successfully. But what he said to every person along the way was, Wendy, this person has important business to tend to, help her get through and make sure she's fast-tracked. The important business was a bottle of shower gel that mattered to my mom. So on my way back, I made sure that every person I talked to, I said, remember, I just came through. Yeah, we got it. You know, our supervisor told us you get fast-tracked. You were important business. And I said, yes, your supervisor took time. It was shower gel for my mom. Your supervisor obviously cares about people. And I thought, in a leadership role, the small things matter. How you communicate, how you treat people sets the culture. And I hope that those individuals who saw how this individual in a leadership, in an authority position, responded to them, to me, and cared about something so small, where he could have just said, you toss that in the garbage, off you go, this is not supposed to go through security. That sets the stage for great customer service and a great culture, and communicates what a leader should be paying attention to, the people around them.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, and what that leader did is showed the people that reported to him what matters. We value people. We're going to take the time to be kind and compassionate here. Yeah. And it gave them permission to do the same thing in the future. Yeah. And that's amazing.
And still followed all the rules.
Yeah,
no rules
exactly.
are broken here. And I think this is important. There was no bending of rules. And there, I love that story for a variety of reasons, Wendy. So thank you for sharing it. One, I think on the subject that we've been talking about on change, even for those individuals that were affected by someone that's now going to come through, they had the information, they knew. So when you got back, everything flew. So there was direction that was there. There was information. I also want to highlight the fact that for you and your mom, how did that then influence the rest of your day? Right?
Yeah, my mom and family were seated on the other side. They'd ordered breakfast. Yeah. As I walked up, I could see my mom was apprehensive. And as soon as I told her, I gave her the thumbs up. Yeah. As soon as she could see me, she just lit up. Sure. And we could sit and enjoy the breakfast. And
nice.
A small thing that mattered a lot.
Yeah, and there's and that influence now that it's going to have on your mom's interactions with everyone else, likely your interactions. Yeah. It is that kind of that pay it forward, that ripple effect that just it goes and goes. And you mentioned that those small things matter. They matter in leadership, of course, but you're changing that experience. That small thing can make a massive difference. So that's awesome.
Yeah, great. Thanks. I realize I have a rave, not a rant. Kind of a interesting story. Over the holidays, I had a chance to connect with a number of my cousins, which was great. And a lot of my cousins now are middle-aged like me and are in positions of leadership in their organizations. One of my cousins works for a massive global corporation and that has thousands and thousands of employees. This global corporation is publicly traded and has been suffering recently in the stock market. And they're in the midst of trying to stop the bleeding financially and downsizing and cuts and changes. And he says, right now, working here in the organization it's just been terrible. Like for people all across, it's very stressful. And he said, recently we were all offered the ability, they were trying to downsize by 35%. And we were offered really generous packages if we wanted to leave. And I asked him, so you didn't leave, why? And he said, well, because I love my team. I've worked so hard with my other co-supervisors to build the team that we have over the last number of years. And we work so well together. And our values are aligned and we trust each other. And guess what? When it came to actually doing the cuts, they kind of left our department alone because we were working so well. And I want to stay because I believe in the people that I'm working with. And it struck me how even in the midst of a massive global corporation, there are many cultures in large organizations. It's not one monolithic culture.
You're right.
There are many cultures. Supervisors, managers, directors set tones for the people within their teams. Mm-hmm. And it creates a buffer against some of the other stresses that might be being felt around in these larger organizations. And I was inspired by my cousin, by the work that he's been doing, and also just struck by that experience.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing to be able to, that shows the power of culture.
Yeah.
Right? That even in a very, very challenging time, someone's having a positive experience.
Yeah.
There's a dozen reasons why it can be a negative experience, but having a positive experience.
And there is negative in the midst of it.
No, I'm not saying
but
there
he
isn't.
wants to stay, right?
But I think that goes back to everything we're talking about here. We're sitting in this middle of a neighborhood. There's all sorts of difficulties going on out in the world, but we're having a great experience.
Right.
That's the power of culture, right? We can get bogged down by all of those things. That would be very, very real. As you're saying that, I was thinking, Eric, about working back that time in my career. I had a CEO I learned a lot from. And I remember we were going through a lot of change and uncertainty at the time. And I remember at a town hall, one employee asking the CEO, do I need to be afraid of losing my job? And the answer that he gave, I remember there was a lot of depth to it. He said, yeah, we're figuring things out. He didn't deny anything. Like, we're really figuring out what our best path forward. He said, do your job, do it well, and you shouldn't have anything to worry about. And I remember the comfort that was in there, because what he was highlighting was just, we're not in the business of just cutting people. I'm not saying it doesn't happen,
Right.
but his point was, what you can influence is you and your team. Do that. Like, we'll worry about the financial stuff here. You worry about your team and what you can do, and we shouldn't have a problem. And that's the way that actually went. And to your point, when I think about some of the shifts that happened in the organization, there were departments that really weren't functioning well. It wasn't so much, it did, there was dollars and cents linked to it, but at the root of it, they weren't really functioning well.
Right.
And I think from a leadership perspective, from a team perspective, if we can create health, and then we tend to do better in those environments,
Right.
it actually does protect us a little bit in those moments. What a great story.
Cool. All right. Well, Chris, we're going to turn the show over to you to take us out with some actionable ideas or steps people can take to socialize change or socialize the ideas of change in their organization.
All right. Thank you. Socializing change. That was I cannot believe how fast that conversation went. Clearly something I'm quite passionate about. I realize I had shared the idea of Geoff Colvin's book, Humans Are Underrated. And I said there's 3 unique human characteristics that he identifies. I only named one of them. So I think I really, before I wrap things up here, should let you know what the other 2 are. The 3 characteristics that Geoff highlights as being uniquely human characteristics. First is empathy, our unique human ability to be empathetic towards one another. The second is our ability to creatively problem solve together. And that idea of creatively problem solving together isn't just about our collective IQ, but it's actually picking up on social cues and pulling the best out of each other through our relationships. And then the third is we're storytellers. That is the most impactful way to share information, to share history, to share our knowledge, is through storytelling. So I do encourage you to look at that book, but I want to use these as we think about, I had some takeaways from our conversation. The first is this. I loved what Eric had to say, that change within organizations it's organizational in nature, but it's individual within its impact. And this idea that people resist change or fear change, we're not so sure that they actually fear change, but they do fear the experience of what change holds for them. So we want to look at change rather than being a good or a bad thing, and as it being something that's value neutral, but it is a constant. And that's always going to be there. So what we need to do is socialize, not socialize the change, which is really telling people what the change is socialize the challenge, socialize the opportunity, or socialize the idea, right? And this is where I'm going to go to those 3 human characteristics. If you tell the story about what we're confronted with, what our challenge is, what the opportunity is, we recognize how it could impact the individuals in the room. Then we can work together to creatively problem solve and often come up with an even better solution long term. So what's important for us to do is, when we are confronted with that inevitable change, is ask ourselves, when's this earliest I can engage with the team, and who is that team I can engage with? Because what you will often find is there are many solutions that are available to you that you didn't even realize. And Scott shared something here around I love so much that sometimes when we're dealing with a change as a leader, sometimes we can get stuck in the mud and we want to get out of it before we talk to anybody about that. There's often resources around you that can actually help you get unstuck. So one of the biggest gifts available to you when you're stuck are those coworkers, those peers, your teams to help you do that. So leverage that. Listen, folks, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining in. I'm hearing feedback from many of you. Keep that coming in. Love to hear what you're enjoying, what you might want to hear differently than that. If what we're talking about resonates with you, in the show notes, there's our workplace culture starter kit. I encourage you to grab that and take a look at anything else that's referenced in the show notes. Look for us, the Achieve Center for Leadership on LinkedIn. Follow us on LinkedIn. There's a lot of resources that are linked through that, but also follow Eric, Wendy, and I on LinkedIn as well. We're trying to be as active as possible and sharing information. So let's stay connected by whatever means are available to us. Until next time, thanks again, and be well, everyone.